Welcome to the Her Story Circle podcast, the podcast that brings you the extraordinary tales of everyday women who are changing the world. I'm your host, Gertrude Mache, and I'd like to acknowledge traditional custodians of the land on which we meet today. I also like to pay my respects to elders, past, present, and emerging. Every week, we dive into the lives, challenges, and triumphs of women from all four corners of the globe. We're here to inspire, enlighten, and connect, sharing stories that uplift and empower. So grab a cup of coffee, settle in, and join us as we explore the incredible journeys of women shaping our future. This is Her Story, where every woman's voice matters. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Her Story TV and the Her Story podcast. This is Gertrude Mache here in beautiful Melbourne, Australia. And today I am graced with the presence of yet another fascinating woman. Welcome, welcome, welcome to our tribe. Please tell everybody your full name, where you're based, how old you are, and share your story with us today.
Hi, I'm Ginny Priem, and I'm located in Minneapolis, Minnesota, right in the middle of the United States. I didn't realize I had to say my age, but I am not ashamed of it. I am 43 years old, and I want to take you back to the beginning of my story. I was traveling home from work when one of my friends wanted to urgently meet for cocktails that evening when I landed at 10 p.m. on a Tuesday. And look, I love an occasional cocktail, but I'm not a 10 p.m. Tuesday night kind of cocktail girl. And this wasn't a 10 p.m. Tuesday night cocktail kind of friendship. So all day I'm going in thinking, how can I go in and be a good friend and supportive of whatever is going on with her? Because clearly this is important. And I walk into this restaurant. My friend displays this arrangement of evidence of lies, deception, and betrayal of the man that was at home sleeping in my house. So I almost walked into this restaurant, one woman with a certain life, this family, and I leave facing the idea of potentially a new life. But I didn't even know what that looked like. I was lost, I was confused. But there was just too much evidence, and the relationship was over that weekend. Now, when I was introduced to Chad, as I call him in my book, You're My Favorite, I was not really interested in dating him because my life was so great. And he also had 2 kids. And so I was very hesitant. But once we started dating, I eventually fell in love. And then I met his 2 kids. And I fell in love 2 more times. And while having a family unit like this was never really part of my, my life plans or my goals, I loved it. I really loved every minute of it. And before that, if you just picture kind of main character energy from a Netflix series or movie, the girl that's traveling, career focused, that was basically me. So imagine this life flip. I completely changed my life, and then it again changed overnight. I basically didn't know who this person was that was living in my house, and it really shook me to my core, and it started to make me question everything. And this story is juicy, and I spill all of the tea. You aren't going to want to miss any of the details, but it goes beyond cheating. It was financial fraud. It was he pretends to be a doctor and performs chiropractic adjustments on people, and he's not. His clients had to change their credit card numbers because he was charging them for services unrendered. You name it, there's a scam with this guy. And so I had to completely shift in terms of what do I do next? And a lot of people give me some heat for this. So what did I do next? I got my nails done. Now, some people might go, Ginny, that's so vain. But that next morning when my life blew up and completely imploded, I didn't know what to do. All I could do was look down at my schedule and do the next thing. And that's what I continued to do until I could get my head straight and start moving on my path forward. Now, as I went on this journey, we don't always have the choice of what happens, but we can choose how we respond. And when we think about change and transformation, I love this saying from a shaman where she says that change is inevitable, but transformation is by conscious choice. So I went on to share my story in my book, which was really the catalyst of everything. And the story is a good one, but the after story is even better. And that's what I share in my podcast, Drinking with Gin, and also as a motivational keynote speaker. I've been kind of coined as the inspirational speaker for grief and growing. And as I ventured on my own path forward, I, in hindsight, looked back and I realized, okay, what are the steps or the components of my healing journey that I might be able to share with other people and help them not just be resilient, because by humans, we're naturally resilient, and resilience is bouncing back. But I'm talking about catapulting your life forward to a better, healthier place. So I developed, and it's part of my coaching model, Gin Path. So there's 3 main components, which is the G, the I, and the N. And the first thing you have to do is acknowledge your story and acknowledge what happened. And sometimes that can be a really hard part of the journey, because a lot of us have been taught to just sweep it under the rug and we don't talk about that. But I'm here to tell you that that is a really big part of it. Now, look, I'm not suggesting that you Forrest Gump it and go sit down on, a bus bench and elbow the stranger next to you and say, hey, let me tell you all about what happened to me. But I am suggesting that acknowledging it is a really important piece of it, even if you just acknowledge it to yourself. The next thing I did was I started gathering information about my community and those around me. I quickly came to understand that a big part of the reason why I welcomed Chad into my life or allowed him into my life is a lot of his behaviors and patterns, while very toxic and abusive, were very familiar to me. And that also made me have to take that hard step of turning the lens inward and really taking a deep dive into myself and who I really am. So self-discovery was a big part of this journey for me. Now, I like to talk about these baboons. And you might be going, Ginny, why are you talking about baboons? I promise it makes sense. So there's this study conducted in Kenya where these scientists observed a troop of baboons. And just bear with me for a second. In this troop of baboons, there were 3 almost subgroups. There was a group of males that were abusive and domineering and aggressive. Know anybody like that? Then there was also a group of males that were a little bit more amiable. And there's also a group of females that were nurturing and kind and loving. Well, the aggressive, domineering, abusive male baboons went scavenging for food. They came across a garbage can filled with meat, and they devoured it. Well, turns out that meat was tainted, and unfortunately, they died. So you might think, well, one of 2 things might happen. Does that other group of males overtake kind of that domineering, aggressive behavior, or does the female behaviors become more dominant? Well, what they observed, the scientists observed, is that when you remove that toxic, abusive behavior, a more harmonious community arises. And so when I looked at my own life, I had to realize that removing some of these toxic behaviors was an important part of my process. So that was a big part of the gathering and getting curious about my own community, what was around me, what I welcomed into my community, and about myself. Then I became very intentional. I became very intentional about the people that I allowed in. very intentional about the actions I took, very intentional about my mindset. I started to pay more attention to, what am I telling myself? I started using intentions and affirmations to build my life and be more aware of my thoughts and my emotions and my beliefs about myself and my own life. And then finally, I started to nurture myself. And nurture isn't just self-care. I know self-care is a hot topic out there right now, but it does include self-care, but it can be so much more. So nurture can really be all-encompassing, physical, mental, and emotional well-being. And so for me, if I think back about getting my nails done, that may have been one of the best things that I could have done in that moment, and not even knowing it, just because I was doing the next thing. But I literally had a stranger. Well, she actually wasn't a stranger. We saw each other about once a month, but I had someone sitting across the table from me holding my hands for 45 minutes when I was in a state of complete distress. So when I look back, that actually was probably a really great way to nurture. And so nurture can be about what we're consuming and nurturing our body with. It can be exercise, but then also being intentional about the type of exercise you're doing and why. It can also be being aware of the type of content you're consuming. And that's very different than the content that you're consuming to gather information and kind of that gathering phase. But what are you maybe unconsciously consuming in social media or media in general? And so those components really helped me catapult my path forward and land in a better place for myself and for my community. So I took all of that. Like I said, this is all part of the after story, which is even better than the juicy stuff that I share in my book. But that sent me on this journey of, now I've exited corporate America, my very successful corporate career spanning over 20 years in leadership, specializing in emotional intelligence and leadership, sales leadership, to now being able to live my purpose as an inspirational keynote speaker. I have a podcast that's a self-improvement podcast. It's called Drinking with Gin. It's not about drinking at all. It's just personal growth chats over drinks of any kind. And sometimes it's just water or tea or coffee, but there's kind of 3 different types of episodes. So I do have some solo episodes. I also have episodes where I bring on experts to really tackle the tough topics. One of the most popular ones was with a therapist who specializes in narcissism, particularly parent-child relationships and co-parenting with narcissists. So I'll bring on experts to really tackle those tough topics. And then I also bring on other guests that can come on and share their inspiring stories, just like Gertrude does here on Her Story Circle. And then finally, I'm a life coach. So I've got the podcast, the author of the #1 best-selling book, You're My Favorite. And now I get to live my purpose. So all of this, that story that kind of shook me to my core, is what sent me on a path to really become the best version of me. And if I look back, I really wasn't that confident. I think that I maybe exuded that, but I have evolved and grown so much from this experience. Like I say, confidence is really how much you like yourself. And I hope that these tools and steps that I took can help other people find this journey of self-discovery and self-love and finding themselves in a better and healthier spot. I really like to refer to it as post-traumatic growth. And I've even had some experts come on and talk about that. It's using your experience to find a new outlook or a new way of life. And that really does define what I've done with my situation. I've completely found a new way of living my life. I have found a new career from it. When I think back to some of the things or the attitudes that I used to have, part of my nurture, if I circle back to that for 1 second, was I discovered meditation. about a year after the split up, after we split up, I was invited on a retreat. It was a meditation retreat in another country. And I had never meditated for 1 second before in my life. And if someone would have said, hey, Ginny, let's go meditate, I would have probably been like, that's okay. You go take your meditation pillow and your woo-woo stuff, and that's fine. But for whatever reason, in that moment, I decided that I would take a 5-day vacation in another country on a meditation retreat. I guess you could say I go all in. So this meditation retreat was a big pivotal moment in my journey, because it's where I learned to meditate and really start to connect with myself. I started doing inner child work. It's where I really started incorporating intentions. And those have been a really big part of my journey and my path forward. That kind of started with this terrible story, but really kind of ended in a self-love story.
Wow. You know, Ginny, your story is so inspiring. I interview so many women, and it's always about the only option you have is how you react to what is coming at you. That's the choice we get to make, right? Now, you lost a lot. You lost somebody you loved. You lost the children that you came with. How did that feel? Because that would be a huge void in your life when you had this little family and suddenly they're gone. How did you cope with that?
The prospect of losing the kids was really, really horrible. But here's a plot twist. I still have a close relationship with them and with their mother. So we actually have plans this Thursday, and I take them on spring break every year. We do a modern family vacation. So they have been that was part of the initial conversation I had with them, was like, look, I made a commitment to you. I intended to be at your high school graduation, your college graduation, your weddings. And their mom was there for that conversation, and she said, and you still will. And so that is a really beautiful part, and it speaks volumes to their mother and the kind of person that she is, and she's amazing. So that part has been a really good kind of plot twist, because I think in many situations, maybe the person that was in my shoes wouldn't have stayed committed to being in their lives. But my perspective is those kids deserve two parental figures that love them unconditionally. And I hope that they continue to feel that from me.
Oh, that is so beautiful. And that is so unusual. It also goes to show your character. You had developed a good relationship with their mom while you were with him, and that continued afterwards. And that is very, very, very unusual. Oh, that's beautiful.
Thank you.
So you went and got your nails done. Now that is my pamper me thing to do. It's either my nails or a massage.
Yes.
So you just thought, what is the next thing I can actually do in this moment, right?
Yeah.
That was the option you had, to look after you. How could you nurture yourself at that moment in time?
Yeah. And it didn't feel like nurture at the time, honestly. I mean, I was sitting there like a zombie. I was sleep deprived. I was a wreck. I was emotionally, physically, and mentally a wreck. And that was just like the next thing on my calendar, that and having to get my snow tires on my car. Those were the two things that I accomplished, and only because they were on my schedule as, like I said, the next thing. And sometimes all you can do is put one foot in front of the other. And that's okay.
That is so true. Your after story is amazing. A lot of times when we are going through these struggles, you can't see the wood from the trees. You can't even see beyond the point that you're at. And I think that's the biggest takeaway from your story today, that the after story can be absolutely magnificent if you allow it to be. So you had to change the circles you were in, the company you kept. I think I was reading a quote the other day that said you were the sum total of the 5 people you spend the most time with. What was that like, having to get rid of the toxic people that were around you as well?
Well, that quite frankly was a journey. And I call it kind of like a game of whack-a-mole. If anybody knows what whack-a-mole is, it's that game and the little thing pops up and you knock it down. It was kind of like once I started consciously making that decision to remove the abusive and toxic behaviors from my life, another one would pop up that was even, they would kind of rise to the top as the worst offender. And luckily there wasn't that many, but they were the people that were very close to me in my life. And it was a journey. I had to learn about things like narcissism and gaslighting and Schadenfreude, which is a German word for people that find joy in the misfortune of others. I had to learn about the gray rock method, and ultimately I had to, employ that to remove a really toxic person from my life. But what I can tell you is that when you do make that conscious decision and you start to create boundaries for yourself and you start to remove, because I had unhealthy coping mechanisms is what I developed from the narcissistic abuse that I had in my life. And once you're able to remove the toxic behaviors, you can shed that false armor to become your most authentic, true, warm version of yourself. And that's what happened for me. And then I was able to create space, and everyone that's in my life now is generous, kind, warm, loving, all of the things that I've been able to uncover about myself that was really there all along, but like I said, was kind of, hidden from this false, tough exterior. And now my community is harmonious and beautiful. And so it's like I made the space for all of that to flourish.
Yeah, sometimes you have to create the space. Nothing new can come through when you've got all of this old, redundant stuff around you. Now, mindfulness and meditation, you talked about negative self-talk. When situations like this happen to us as women, we tend to punish ourselves. We say things to ourselves you would never say to your best friend. Talk a little bit about the power of meditation, the power of being aware of that voice when it comes and how to control it.
So there's something called cognitive dissonance. I think we hear a lot about cognitive diffusion. We hear a lot about cognitive dissonance, but cognitive diffusion is actually acknowledging your emotions and behaviors and then releasing them. So not just ignoring them and shutting them down, but acknowledging them and processing them. Because look, let me tell you, Gertrude, I was angry at first. And when I went back and I read some of the early parts that I had written about the book, I was like, whew, that girl's angry. And you know what? Rightly so. That's okay. I needed to process that, but that wasn't the story that I wanted to put out into the world. The story I wanted to put out into the world is the one that I did. And I think with social media in the comparative society and world that we live in, everything is kind of this comparison. And I think it was, I forget who said it, you might know, comparison is the thief of joy. And joy is really like the joy and peace are the elite top emotions that we can feel and be living in. And in order to get there, you've got to move out of stages of anger and fear and so many other emotions to make space for that. So that's why I say the intentions are so important. And I actually have a whole keynote called K is kind. K starts with kindness, but it begins within. I messed that whole thing up. K starts with kindness, but it begins within. And you can't really expect other people to be kind to you when you're not even kind to yourself. And so I encourage people to monitor their negative self-talk. And if you are aware that you're engaging in negative self-talk, that's a really great first step. So congratulations for being able to acknowledge it. And then start tracking it and pay attention. One of the exercises I do is I have you say something negative to yourself and then flip the script. And sometimes flipping the script completely can be a really big challenge. So maybe try something 10% nicer and then pay attention to how that makes you feel. And our thoughts and our words, become what we believe, and we become what we believe. So it's a really important part of the process.
Wow. So what is the title of your book, Ginny, and where can people get it?
It's called You're My Favorite. Amazon is probably the easiest place to grab it because they're, the behemoth these days. But yeah.
Fantastic. Now, let me take you back to that young woman who was hit with a reality she didn't see coming. You're in shock. You don't know where to start. You don't know what to do. If you could go back and have a conversation with the younger you, based on what life has taught you up to this point, what 3 nuggets of wisdom would you share?
You don't have to do it all. You don't have to be everything to everybody. That was a big part of my journey. Is I was living my life as what other people and who other people thought I should be. And when you shed that needing external validation and start living your life for yourself and who you truly are, it is so rewarding and such a beautiful thing. And I think the third thing that I'll kind of leave with is I also lost my dad a couple of years ago, and he was my guy. So first, right before I met this guy, I lost my brother, which was kind of the first really big traumatic thing. So I kind of had like a 1, 2, 3 punch within a matter of a few years. So my brother passed away, and that kind of wrecked me. But for whatever reason, I think because we know that death is inevitable, death and taxes, I think they say, are the 2 things in life that are inevitable. But you don't always expect like a shocking and traumatic end and someone to not be who you thought they were. But my dad, I always feared losing my dad. It was really the thing in life that I just knew was going to destroy me. Like I always said it, like, who's going to pick up the pieces of the puzzle when that happens? Because I was daddy's girl, daddy's princess, the apple of his eye, all of the sayings. And he would say it, that I was his favorite. And so he had what I call dadisms. And I think of them as like a dad joke. Well-intended, but poorly timed. Like you never wanted to hear a dadism. Now, of course, I can't get enough because the life lessons are huge. And Gertrude, actually, one of the things that you said was talking about, you're only as good as the company you keep. That was one of my dad's dadisms. But the other one is you are the architect of your own destiny. And so I feel like that's been the common theme in our conversation today is we can't always control what happens, but we have the opportunity to control how we respond and the steps that we take on the journey after what happens. And so, yeah, you are the architect of your own destiny.
It's interesting because you had multiple traumatic experiences. It wasn't just losing your partner, because in losing a partner, a marriage, going through a divorce, it's another death. Mm-hmm. You grieve the same way you would grieve as if somebody had died. And then you lost your brother, you lost your father. So it was multiple compounding incidents. And we've got a very similar story, because with me, it started with my having the heart failure. Exactly a year later, my dad died of a sudden heart attack. Exactly a year later, my partner's mother died on Zoom during COVID while we were talking to his brother. Then my mother died 3 weeks later. Then my daughter had a miscarriage. So that compounding emotional effect can take its toll on the human heart. So post-traumatic growth, that's a very inspiring term, that you can grow out of trauma. But I can hear from you that it's a mindset. It's where you decide to put your focus and be very intentional about it. So let's teleport you into the future as my last question for you. You're now 100 years old. You're sitting on your porch, surrounded by your dogs, your cats, maybe a couple of kids. Who knows? And you could have a conversation with this wise woman who has led you to this point. If time was an illusion and you could teleport into the future, what would you say to this 100-year-old you?
Well, this is actually a little bit easier of a question to answer than I thought. So I'm a contributor to a women's magazine called The Circle Magazine, and they had their issue launch party last week. And one of the models on the cover for that issue brought her 14-year-old daughter. And I was chatting with her. She was 14 going on 45. I mean, this girl was such an old soul, as we hear that saying. And she was at 14 years old, which I think 14, 15, those were the hardest ages for me as a teenager, when you really have that peer pressure and the external voices and validation, that external validation and the social comparison with social media and magazines and models and everything going on. This girl was so sure of herself and what she liked and what she didn't like. Does not like sports, is not interested, will not do them, has no interest. But you know what she likes to do? Read books. And she was very confident in herself and what she liked, what she wanted to participate in, and what she didn't want to participate in, which is essentially boundaries. So I would say learn to know yourself, learn to love yourself, and be that authentic you, because that will save you so much time and energy, and nobody can be a better you than you.
Beautiful way to end our segment today. Ginny, it is such an honor to have met you. Just keep doing what you're doing. A lot of times as women, we forget that wise woman is already inside us, and she's guiding us every step of the way. So sometimes when I get really stuck, I go into my meditation and I just ask her the question, what is the next step? And then you wake up with these knowings, go and have your nails done, get a massage, whatever that is. She's already there. She's already there. Wow. Well, thank you so much. I can't wait to meet you in person when I come to Minneapolis in September, October this year. And thank you to everybody who's tuned in today. The HerStory Circle is attracting some phenomenal women from all over the world. Women who are transmuting their pain, their trauma into gold. We're sharing these stories so that your story can be the light at the end of the tunnel for another woman who's feeling stuck, who's not knowing which way to go. So thank you for being so real and authentic, Ginny.
Thank you for having me.
You've certainly started my day on a very high note today. Thank you, everybody. I'll be back again tomorrow with yet another amazing guest. In the meantime, have a fantastic day, morning, or evening, wherever you are in the world, and bye for now. Thanks, Ginny.
Thank you.
Thank you for tuning into the HerStory Circle podcast. I hope today's story has inspired you to believe in the power of our stories and the difference you can make in the world when you use your voice. I'm Gertrude Mache, and it's been an honor to share this space with you, where voices from all walks of life come together to weave a rich tapestry of diverse perspectives. Don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review our podcast to help us share these stories with more listeners. Follow us on social media by looking for the HerStory Circle podcast for more updates, and join us tomorrow for another episode filled with courage, resilience, and empowerment. Remember, your story matters, and together we're building a stronger, more inclusive world. Until next time, keep making